The night I packed my bags, my wife was already asleep. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a long time, longer than I probably should have, watching the rise and fall of her shoulders under the blanket. The lamp on her nightstand was still on. She always fell asleep reading and never remembered to turn it off. I used to do it for her. Every night for 11 years, I'd walk over, close whatever book she'd left open on her chest, and click off that lamp. That night, I left it on. I carried 2 suitcases and a duffel bag to my car in 3 trips. Slow and quiet, the way you move through a house when you're trying not to wake a sleeping child. By the time I pulled out of the driveway, it was past midnight. I didn't leave a note. I didn't send a text. I just drove north on the highway until the city lights disappeared behind me, and I told myself she'd understand eventually. I told myself she probably wouldn't even be surprised. I was wrong about that. But I didn't find out how wrong for a long time. My wife's name is Claire. We met when we were both 26 at a friend's backyard barbecue in Columbus. On the kind of July afternoon that smells like cut grass and lighter fluid, she was arguing with someone about whether a hot dog counted as a sandwich, and she was losing the argument but refusing to admit it, and I thought she was the most stubborn, funny, alive person I'd ever seen. We were engaged 18 months later, married at 29, bought a house in a suburb outside Cincinnati when we were 32, a place with a big kitchen she wanted, and a garage I wanted, and a backyard neither of us used as much as we thought we would. For most of those years, we were good. Not perfect, nobody's perfect, but genuinely good. We argued about money sometimes, about whose turn it was to call the plumber, about whether we were spending enough time together, or too much time in front of separate screens. Regular stuff. The kind of friction that comes from 2 people building a life in close quarters. It never felt dangerous. It felt like marriage. Then she got sick. It was the spring of our 35th year, 30 years into the house. 2 years after we quietly stopped talking about whether we wanted kids, she found a lump during a self-exam on an ordinary Tuesday morning, called her doctor that afternoon, and by the end of the following week, we had a diagnosis. Breast cancer, stage 2. Her oncologist said the prognosis was good if they moved quickly. We moved quickly. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. Claire was incredible through treatment. I don't mean she never had bad days, or bad weeks, or moments where she sat on the bathroom floor and cried and couldn't tell me why. She had all of those, but she faced it with a kind of grim, methodical determination that I had never seen in her before, and have never stopped admiring. She went to every appointment. She did everything the doctors told her. She let me drive her to chemo and sit in the waiting room for 3 hours with a bad paperback and bad coffee. And she never once told me I didn't have to do that. 14 months later, she was in remission. The oncologist used the word remarkable. Her numbers were clean. They'd do monitoring every 6 months. Standard protocol. But all the indicators were pointing in the right direction. We cried in that office. Both of us. The ugly kind of crying where you can't breathe right. We went out to dinner that night at the Italian place we'd always liked and split a bottle of wine we couldn't really afford and held hands across the table. On the drive home, she said, "I feel like I've been holding my breath for over a year. I don't know how to exhale." I told her we'd figure it out together. I believed that when I said it. What I didn't understand, what I don't think either of us understood, was that surviving something that big doesn't just return you to who you were before. It changes the architecture of a person. It rearranges things inside them that they can't always name or explain. And sometimes the people who love the most are the ones who end up standing in the rubble, confused, wondering what happened to the house they thought they knew. The distance started small. She began going to a support group for survivors. Twice a week at first, then 3 times. I thought that was healthy. I still think it was healthy. But she started spending more time with people from that group outside of meetings, people I didn't know. And she stopped telling me much about those conversations. She said there were things she needed to process with people who'd been through it the same way she had. I understood that in my head. In my chest, it felt different. She started taking solo trips. A weekend in Nashville with a woman from the group named Patrice. A few days in Nashville to just walk around and think. She'd come back quieter, or sometimes brighter. But either way, she'd come back different. And the difference always felt pointed slightly away from me, like a compass that used to point at our life together, and had slowly started finding a different north. I asked her once if she was happy. She said, "I'm trying to figure out what that even means now." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I didn't say anything. That was probably my first real mistake. She started staying up late in the living room after I'd gone to bed. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning, and find the other side of the mattress empty. Sometimes I'd go find her, and she'd be sitting on the couch in the dark with her phone, and she'd look up and smile and say she just couldn't sleep, come back to bed. I always went back to bed. I never asked who she was talking to. I should have asked. I didn't ask because I was afraid of the answer, and I think somewhere in my brain I decided that not knowing was a form of preservation, that if I didn't look directly at the thing that was scaring me, it couldn't fully exist. That's not wisdom. That's just fear with a strategy. The thing that finally cracked me open was a Thursday in November. I'd come home early from work. I'm a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm, and a meeting had been canceled, and her car was in the driveway, which was unusual for a Thursday afternoon. She was supposed to be covering an after-school tutoring program. She'd been doing it for months. Said she loved it. Said it made her feel purposeful. I walked in through the side door and heard her laughing in the kitchen. Real laughing. The kind she used to do with me in our early years. Loose and unguarded. I came around the corner and she was on the phone, leaning against the counter with her shoes off and her hair down, and when she saw me, she stopped laughing. Just stopped, like a switch. Her face went through 3 different expressions in about 2 seconds, and none of them were the right one. She said, "I have to go," into the phone and hung up. I asked who that was. She said it was a friend from her group. I asked why she wasn't at tutoring. She said it was canceled. We stood there in the kitchen, and neither of us said anything else. And the silence was so heavy, I felt like I could put my hands on it. I nodded eventually. I said okay. I went upstairs and changed out of my work clothes, and I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought, I don't recognize my life. I didn't say that to her. I should have. Instead, we ate dinner, watching television, and talked about nothing. And after she fell asleep, I lay in the dark for hours doing math in my head, counting up absences and silences and things she'd stopped sharing with me. And by the time the room started going gray with early light, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to blow up our marriage with accusations I couldn't prove. I wasn't going to turn into the kind of man who checks his wife's phone while she's sleeping. But I also wasn't going to keep pretending I didn't feel what I felt. The loneliness. The growing certainty that somewhere in the process of her surviving, I had lost her. And that maybe she didn't even notice I was gone. I thought the kindest thing I could do for both of us was to just leave. I know how that sounds. I've had years to sit with how it sounds, and I still go back and forth about whether I was right. But at the time, it felt like the only way to be honest without burning everything down. I wasn't ready for the conversation. I wasn't sure she was either, and some part of me, the part I'm least proud of, thought that if I left, she'd realize what she was losing. That part wasn't wrong exactly, but it wasn't right either. And the cost of the way I did it turned out to be higher than I'd calculated. I moved to a city 4 hours north, Pittsburgh, where I had a college friend named Kevin who said I could crash on his couch for a while. A while turned into 3 weeks, then a month. Then I found a furnished apartment on Craigslist near the river and signed a 6-month lease and started trying to assemble some version of a life from scratch. I got a job transfer. My company had a regional office there, and my supervisor was understanding enough not to ask too many questions. I told HR it was a family situation. That was technically true. For the first month, I barely left the apartment except for work. I ate a lot of takeout and watched a lot of baseball and called my brother on the weekends because he was the only person I told anything to. My brother Victor. He's 3 years younger than me and always been the smarter one, emotionally speaking. He didn't tell me I'd done the right thing, but he also didn't tell me I'd done the wrong thing. He just listened and then said, "What do you actually want?" And I said I didn't know anymore. He said, "Okay, figure that out first." Claire texted me the day after I left, then called, then texted again. I read everything, but I didn't respond for 2 weeks, which was cowardly, and I know it. When I finally replied, I kept it short. I said I needed some time, that I was safe, that I was sorry for the way I'd done it. She called immediately. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail that I've listened to more times than I want to admit, even now. She said, "I don't know what I did. I know I haven't been fully here. I know I've been somewhere else in my head, and I didn't know how to bring you with me. But I didn't think you'd just disappear. I didn't think you were even that unhappy. I thought we were okay. Tell me we can talk about this." I sat in my empty Pittsburgh apartment, listening to that message and feeling like the worst person alive. Because here's the thing I hadn't let myself fully understand until that moment. She hadn't known how bad it was. Not really. I'd done such a thorough job of being quiet and steady and not causing problems that she had genuinely not seen how close to the edge I was, which meant that, in some ways, leaving without a word wasn't an honest move. It was just a louder version of the same silence I'd been practicing for months. I texted her back and said, "I hear you. I'm not ready to talk yet. Give me a little more time." She gave me more time. 6 weeks. Then she drove 4 hours north on a Saturday morning without calling first, found my address through my brother, who will absolutely be hearing about that for the rest of his life, and knocked on my apartment door at 10 in the morning. I opened the door and she looked like herself, and also not like herself. Thinner than I remembered. Her hair was different, shorter. She was wearing that green jacket she's had since before we were married, and she had a coffee in each hand, one of which she held out to me without saying a word. I took the coffee. I stepped back. She came inside. We sat at my small kitchen table and didn't talk for a while. Long enough that it should have been uncomfortable. But somehow it wasn't. Or it was uncomfortable, but it was the right kind. The kind where two people are finally in the same room with the truth and neither one is running from it anymore. She said, "I owe you an explanation. Or I owe you the attempt at one, even if I can't get it exactly right." I said, "Okay." She told me that after remission, she'd gone through something she couldn't name at the time. A kind of unraveling, she called it. Not depression exactly, though her therapist had used that word. More like she'd spent 14 months with the entire focus of her life narrowed to a single point of survival, and when that focus suddenly lifted, she didn't know who she was without it. She'd spent so long in crisis mode that she'd forgotten how to just live, and instead of turning toward me, toward us, she'd turned inward and then outward, toward people and experiences that felt new and uncomplicated, because our life together held so much weight from everything we'd been through. She said, "I wasn't cheating on you. I need you to know that." The person I was talking to on the phone that day, she was a woman from my group. Her name is Denise. She was going through something with her own marriage, and I was trying to help her. I stopped laughing when you walked in because I felt guilty, not because I'd done something wrong, but because I knew how everything looked, and I knew I'd been giving you reasons to doubt me, and I felt ashamed of that. I asked why she couldn't have just told me what she was going through. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because you were so good. Through all of it, you were just so steady and so good, and I think I convinced myself that you were fine, that you were handling it, that you didn't need me to hold you up because you were too busy holding me up." And then when I started to fall apart in this different way, this quieter way, I didn't know how to tell you without making you feel like the year you'd given me hadn't been enough. I sat with that for a long time. Then I said, "I needed you to. I just didn't tell you." She said, "I needed you to. I just didn't tell you." She said, I know that now." We didn't hug. Not yet. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was rawer than that. Two people being honest for the first time in too long, and the honesty felt fragile, like something that could still break if we moved too fast. I told her about the Thursday, about walking in and seeing her face close like a shutter, about lying awake that night, counting all the ways I'd felt invisible, about how I hadn't said any of it because I didn't want to be the person adding to her burden after everything she'd been through. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "I am so sorry. I am so sorry you felt that alone and I didn't see it." That was when I cried. I hadn't cried since the night I drove away, and something about being seen, actually seen, after months of feeling like I was standing behind frosted glass, broke something open in me that needed to be broken. We talked for 4 hours that day, not solving anything exactly, just finally speaking the sentences we've been swallowing for too long. She told me about her therapy, about what she was starting to understand about herself and the way she coped. I told her about my therapy. I'd started seeing someone in Pittsburgh, at Victor's suggestion, and it was the best decision I'd made in years. We talked about what we'd each been afraid of, and what we still didn't know, and whether two people who loved each other but had failed each other so thoroughly could find their way back. She didn't ask me to come home. I noticed that. She said, "I'm not here to pressure you. I'm here because I needed you to know the truth. What you do with it is yours." I thought about it for another 3 weeks. Not because I didn't know what I wanted. I think somewhere in those 4 hours at my kitchen table I'd already known. But because I wanted to be sure I was choosing it for the right reasons. Not out of guilt or habit or the fear of being alone. I wanted to go back if I went back, because I genuinely believed we could build something better than what we'd had. Something more honest. Something where we actually told each other when we were drowning instead of waiting until one of us jumped ship. I called her on a Tuesday night. I said, "I want to come home, but I want us to do this differently." She said, "I want that too. Tell me what that looks like for you. We talked for another 2 hours. Then I started the process of unwinding my Pittsburgh life. Gave notice on the apartment, arranged the job transfer back, said goodbye to Kevin, who'd become genuinely good company through all of it, drove back south on a Saturday morning in March, with my 2 suitcases and my duffel bag, and a slightly better understanding of what I owed the person I'd promised my life to. She was standing on the porch when I pulled up, not dramatically, not like a movie. She was in jeans and an old sweatshirt, holding a mug of coffee, and she looked nervous. I was nervous too. I got out of the car, and we stood in the driveway looking at each other for a moment. And then I walked up, and she handed me her coffee without saying anything. And I drank some and handed it back, and that was it. That was the reunion. 2 people sharing a cup of coffee on a porch in March. We've been in couples therapy since. Our therapist is a woman named Dr. Abrams, and she is relentlessly unwilling to let either of us hide in comfortable half-truths, which is hard and necessary. We talk about things now. Actually talk, not just coexist. I tell her when I'm scared. She tells me when she's disappearing into her own head. We're not perfect, and we're not fixed. And I don't think either of those words is really the goal. Last month, she came home from her survivors group and sat down next to me on the couch and said, "Someone asked me today what my marriage was like, and I said it was the most honest relationship I've ever been in. I thought about our kitchen on that Thursday in November, about all the things we'd swallowed for too long, about 2 suitcases loaded into a car at midnight. I said, it wasn't always." She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "No, but it is now." That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the leaving, not the months apart, not even the morning she showed up at my door with coffee. The part I come back to is that small, ordinary sentence on an ordinary evening. It is now. Because that's the thing about getting lost inside a marriage. Sometimes you have to go all the way to the bottom of it to understand what you were always trying to build. Not a life without pain, or without distance, or without the particular silence that settles between 2 people who stop being brave with each other. But a life where you keep choosing to come back, where you keep learning how to say the hard things before they grow heavy enough to walk out, carrying them alone. I left without saying goodbye once. I don't plan on doing it again. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any grand cosmic sense. I don't think the universe was keeping score or sending me a lesson wrapped in a bow, but I do think that most of what happens to us in a marriage is the direct result of choices we make, usually small ones, usually quiet ones that we barely notice we're making at the time. I chose silence for too long, that's the honest truth of it. Every night I didn't tell Claire I was struggling. Every dinner where I said, "I'm fine," because it was easier than starting something. Every time I swallowed the fear and told myself she had enough on her plate, I was making a choice. And choices compound. They stack up in the dark until one Thursday afternoon they're standing right there in your kitchen, looking back at you, and you don't recognize the life you're inside of anymore. The thing about integrity, real integrity, not the version that sounds good in a toast, is that it demands honesty even when honesty is inconvenient. Even when the person you love is in pain, and you don't want to add to it. Even when being truthful means admitting that you are not as steady as you've been pretending to be. I failed that test for a long time. I thought I was being strong by not burdening her. What I was actually doing was lying, slowly by omission, until the lie had its own weight. And Claire, she had her own reckoning with that. She'd survived something terrifying and come out the other side not knowing who she was. And instead of reaching for me, she turned inward and then outward toward anything that felt uncomplicated. I understand that now in a way I couldn't when I was in the middle of it. Survival changes people. It's not an excuse, but it is an explanation. And there's a difference between those 2 things that matters. What I know now is that intelligence in a relationship isn't about being right. It's about being curious, about asking the question instead of assuming the answer. I assumed for months that Claire knew how I felt. She assumed I was handling it. We were both wrong, and those twin assumptions nearly cost us everything. The smartest thing either of us did was eventually sit down across from each other and say the true thing out loud, even when it was uncomfortable to say and hard to hear. The resilience part. That's the piece I'm still working on. Resilience isn't toughness. It's not the ability to endure without breaking. It's the willingness to break, recognize what broke, and then do the slow work of putting something better in its place. Victor told me to figure out what I actually wanted before I made any decisions. That was good advice. It forced me to sit with myself long enough to understand that what I wanted wasn't out. It was honesty. A marriage where two people were actually present with each other, even in the hard parts. We're building that now. Imperfectly. With help. In the office of a therapist who doesn't let us hide, Claire shows up to that work the same way she showed up to her treatment. With grim, quiet determination. I show up trying to learn how to speak before I disappear. I left without saying goodbye once. I don't plan on making that same choice again.